Today, I'm going to be giving my updated tier list for Honkai Star Rail as of version 1.4. Now, I didn't do one for 1.3, so I will also have my thoughts in here for those characters. And I'm going to start from the bottom of my tier list, and then I'm going to work my way up to the best characters. And the tiers within themselves aren't ordered, so it's just like a general sort of placing for how well I think the characters perform in the game right now. So starting out with my F tier, I do think that this is by far the worst two characters in the game, being Arlan and the physical MC. The main reason I think these two are just like worse in the game is because not only are they just like kind of whatever when it comes to damage and their role on teams, but also the fact that it seems like they don't have anything going for them and not really any like potential for them to get better. In physical MC's case, since he is the first character you get in the game, he's very much just basic and doesn't really have any like possible niches that can make him better. Whereas for Arlan focuses on sacrificing his own HP to be able to deal more damage, but there already is a character that performs that same exact role but does it a whole lot better, which we'll get to as we get further in the tier list. So these two, as unfortunate as it is, they are the worst characters in Honkai Star Rail right now. Then moving on to our D tier, we have Herta and Himeko. So starting out with Herta here, I do think that Herta is a bit worse than Himeko. Now these two do work extremely well together, but Herta just really is not as worth it to run as a lot of other ice characters in the game. And her follow-up attacks, while they can be good in like multi-target fights, they're really not going to be as great in single target since it does base on how many enemies do get to below 50% HP. And other than that, like her damage can be good, if built right, obviously, but we can also say that about every character. Then Himeko, I do think Himeko is definitely better than Herta right now, and I do think that Topaz's addition to the game definitely helped us out for, using Himeko, because Himeko, her follow-up attack is a little bit better in terms of consistency than Herta's, because it focuses more on the weakness break. So if you get 3 weakness breaks, you get an AoE follow-up attack, which is very nice in those, multi-target battles. But again, kind of similar issues with these two, which is that if you're in a single target battle or like not that many enemies, you'll have a harder time of getting those follow-up attacks and really getting the damage that you're going to want to get with them. But because these two do have that potential of like the follow-up attack meta, possibly advancing even more when we get more follow-up attack characters, they're not completely dead under the water like Arlan and physical MC are. So now moving on to my C tier, these are characters that I think still have some value for players, but ultimately don't really function as well as characters that are above them, mainly just either because of power creep or because the way the game has shifted compared to when these characters came out to now. So, starting out with March 7th. March 7th is a very solid sustain character, but her main issue compared to every other sustain is that she's only able to shield one ally per turn, which, with a lot of the enemies now being able to do a lot of AoE and just damage to multiple enemies or multiple allies of yours, that just makes March 7th not as valuable as pretty much every other sustain, since a lot of them are able to either shield multiple allies or provide defensive benefits or healing benefits for multiple allies as well. So her being a single target sustain isn't the greatest thing ever for her, so that does unfortunately put her down in C tier here. Then we have Yukong, who out of the Harmony characters is the the most annoying to use, because if you don't have her at E6, she does struggle to consistently be able to provide her buffs to the team, or to the characters that need the buffs in your team, which will mainly be your DPS. So to use her, pre E6, you have to really speed tune your team, and that can be really annoying and something that I'm sure a lot of players probably don't want to do, which is why they don't use her. And while her buffs for like damage, crit rate, crit damage can be really solid, not being able to consistently have that does definitely suck. Now at E6 it is a bit more manageable, but just comparing how easy it is to use the other characters for Harmony and get their buffs more consistently, that definitely puts her below every other Harmony character and puts her right here in C tier. Then next up we have Sushang. Now Sushang is definitely like a solid physical character if you don't have many physical characters. She was given out during version 1.3 as part of an event for free. Unfortunately, players can't claim that anymore, but if you did get Sushang from that, that's definitely good for a lot of players. as she is able to be a good DPS, focusing on getting boosts in her damage from weakness break on enemies, and she just is able to put out some decent numbers. But an issue with her, and then also a few other characters in this tier, is the fact that they are just kind of lagging behind the new characters, mainly just because of power creep, which is a little unfortunate. But even with those characters being extremely good and better than Sushang, other DPS characters, I definitely do think that Sushang can still be a very solid option for free-to-play players, especially if you are lacking a physical type character. Then we have Serval. Now Serval, pretty much her kit is pretty much just damage on erudition, and while that was nice to use at the start of the game with other lightning characters coming out, like Jing Yuan a little bit, but then also Kafka especially, that makes Serval basically kind of obsolete, which is unfortunate. Now, depending on what they do with lightning, I feel like they could be Serval could have sort of like revival, and she does have chances to apply shock as well. So depending on what they might do with other characters, Serval might have some synergy with them. So I do think that there is that possibility, but also Serval just by herself, she is a very good early game character as well. So she does have some value there, but she will definitely fall off as you get further into the game for sure. And next up we have Natasha, who I think is the worst of the healers in the game. Now, that doesn't mean she's bad by any means, because not only is she a free-to-play option, because you do get her for free during the story, but also, she does have some cleanse, she has decent heals, so she does have a lot of utility as well, which is going to be really helpful for a lot of players. Then we have Hook, who I think, Hook is probably one of the least ran characters in the game. I don't see a lot of people using Hook, especially even early on in the game's lifespan, back in 1.0. But Hook can definitely do some good damage, has a chance to apply burn DOT, but just once again, same thing with Sushang and Serval, in terms of damage, there's just better characters that are out. So while Hook can be very good early game if you don't have many characters, I do think that she just pales in comparison to some other DPS characters. And then lastly for C tier, we have Dan Heng, who I do think it might be the best character in this tier, even though I didn't order the tiers within themselves. So yeah, Dan Heng, he does suffer from the similar thing of Serval, Sushang, and Hook in not doing as much damage as these newer characters, especially the 5 stars. I mean, for obvious reasons, they're going to make the limited 5 stars do a lot of damage, so that they're going to be more desirable for players. But Dan Heng still does, he does kind of hold up when it comes. I mean, depending on how well you have him built, but having him with a solid support character, I mean, pretty much any Harmony character will do. Can still put up decent numbers, and he is just pretty much a straightforward DPS character, so no like specific setups or anything you have to do with him, so he's very easy to use. He is free as well, which does make him very good. So now moving on to the B tier, we have quite a few characters here, so we're just gonna go through them one by one, starting out with Lynx here. Now I do think that Lynx as a healer is very good. I do think as utility she is very good. Although, with my limited use of her, I do think that in terms of sustaining teams, she could, struggle a little bit since her healing multipliers are on a very similar level as Natasha's, which is definitely, not the greatest thing ever, but she does make up for that with her utility. And she does seem to be a little bit more niche compared to every other healer because of her skills effect, which will increase the likelihood of destruction and preservation characters who her skill is used on to be attacked. So she isn't able to solo sustain as much, I would say, as other healers are, but even with Lynx, that does help to have those destruction characters and preservation characters take the brunt of the attacks, which are going to be your tankier characters. So having one of those on the team with Lynx can be very good, and because it's only those two paths, you'll likely either see, if you have a preservation character, that's typically going to be another sustain, and then destruction character, a lot of the times, is probably going to be a DPS. So having those will, benefit Lynx, but just compared to some of the other healers, I do think that, having more healing would also benefit Lynx, so I think that does put Lynx here. Then next up we have Luka. Luka's in a little bit of a weird spot because he was released with Kafka to be, like the physical DOT character, but he ended up not even being as good with her as Sampo. So he kind of did get put into a weird spot, but I do think Luka can also work very well as a physical option, plus also having good value as a sub DPS or a break effect build on him to deal some good damage as well as like a side damage dealer. So yeah, he can have some value, but I would say not as much value as some characters that are above him. Then also in B tier, I have Guinaifen, and this is pretty much only for version 1.4 because from what I have heard, the streets have been telling me that there is the new relic sets that are coming out are going to be very good for DOT characters like Guinaifen, Sampo, Kafka. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that performs. I haven't tested too much with Guinaifen since I am kind of waiting to fully build her till those relics come out. But I do really, I do really like how her gameplay is with the Fire Kiss being able to boost damage for on an enemy by any type of damage. So Guinaifen can both serve as a DOT character, but can also be kind of similar to Luka, can be like a sub DPS or like supportive kind of character where she'll increase the amount of damage that your DPS can do to the enemies. So she definitely has a lot of value and utility there, and I'm going to be interested to see how the new relics and whatnot are going to benefit her as well. If they're really good, they might even boost her to A tier. Then we have Welt here. Now, Welt is a character that I think has a ton of value and is very unique, but just because of the nature of the characters that have come out, I've seen myself using Welt kind of less and less, just based on the teams that I have and how I've been structuring my gameplay. But that doesn't mean Welt is bad by any means. He does have a lot of slowdown in his kit, which is going to be helpful for getting characters to, getting your characters to get more action before the enemy has theirs. And, slowdown and imprisonment are very strong regardless. And because his imprisonment ends up being AoE, that makes Welt very valuable as well. I just hope that something comes out, characters that might benefit off of his slowness more to make him a bit more valuable in the current, state of the game. But he definitely does have a lot of potential in his kit. Then next up, we have Yanqing. Now, I do think Yanqing can be very good, but the main problem with him is that you can't have him get hit, so you're kind of forced to run him with a preservation character that can provide shields, which will pretty much almost always be either Gepard or the Fire MC. March 7th could work, but if you don't have a second sustain character, then your team might still take a lot of damage there. But yeah, overall Yanqing, he does do a lot of good damage, but because you have to basically kind of babysit him and make sure he doesn't get hit for him to be able to do his full potential kind of damage, he isn't as good as many other DPS characters in the game. Then next up is Sampo here. Now Sampo, he works extremely well on the DOT team. I run him all the time with my Kafka, but in comparison to some other characters like those secondary sub DPS or kind of I would say kind of support, he's kind of like a DOT support in the aspect of increasing the amount of dot damage taken by enemies with his ultimate. I do think that outside of that, he doesn't really provide as much for the team. He really just focuses on that one niche, which isn't entirely a bad thing, but I think with how much some of these other characters are doing, it does kind of push him down a bit on the tier list. But Sampo is still extremely valuable, especially with Eidolons. Then here we're going to have Fire MC. I think Fire MC is still very solid, but when comparing them to the more recent sustain characters, like Luocha and Xuan, I do think that they are, I wouldn't say they're really falling off, but they are just getting slightly power crept. I still use Fire MC very often, and they are able to, tank a lot of hits for me, which is very good. So I'm not really too worried about them, being in B tier right now, because, even though this is the third highest tier, all these characters here still have a lot of value. They just might not be as good as some other characters that have come out. But yeah, overall, definitely a big Fire MC supporter, and I do think that, she will continue to perform extremely well. There might just be better characters that come out, but she still is very good there as well. Then we have Asta, and I think Asta is very solid as a support character, definitely better than Yukong. She's a lot more consistent with her buffs because it focuses on her hitting multiple enemies in the same turn to keep her charging stacks up. Now, she does run into a little trouble when you're not fighting as many enemies, because you won't be able to have your charging stacks always up, because she does lose a certain amount at the start of her turn. But other than that, if you are in those situations where you're typically fighting 3 to 5 enemies, you should have basically no problem keeping her stacks up, and then also her being able to increase the speed of your allies as well as their attack is also a very solid, boost for her as well. So definitely, very solid, but not quite as good as the harmonies above her. Then we have Bailu, who's a character that I've talked about multiple times on the channel, and I am a Bailu believer. I do think Bailu is not mid. Bailu is not like bottom tier in the game. She doesn't have cleanse, which can definitely make things harder, for sure. But because of that, when I do team building, I take that into consideration, and I run a different character that has cleanse a lot of the time. But not even always. Like sometimes I'll run Kafka, Sampo, Bailu, and Fire MC. And with that team, I was able to 30-star MOC, along with the other team I used. So while Bailu doesn't have cleanse, depending on what enemies you're fighting, as long as I was able to prepare, she was able to keep my team healthy. Like I had almost no risk of dying in a lot of situations, and she just she does a lot of healing, and damage mitigation is very strong as an ability. Now would the cleanse make her better? Absolutely. But for her, she can still do what she needs to do. So there might be characters that have a lot more utility than her, but I still think she's very much a B tier character right now. Then I also have Clara, who I think is one of the better characters in this tier, mainly because, with her follow-up attacks being on counters, and also her being a destruction character who has a higher chance of being hit than a lot of other characters, she does perform very well in that role. Now, I've used her a little bit here and there. I don't have her fully built, but Clara is able to, just do a lot of damage to enemies through her counter, and then also with her ultimate, both reducing the amount of damage she takes and also increasing her attack damage from her counters and making them AoE. So Clara does have a lot of value, and especially with Topaz coming out, who we're about to talk about right now, Clara is just definitely getting stronger when there are more characters who can either focus on improving her follow-up attacks, or characters that will make it so that she's hit more often, because she wants to be a sponge that'll take all the damage and dish it back in her counterattacks. Then we have Topaz as our last character in the B tier. Now Topaz I do think she is still solid, like all the characters here. I think she is solid, but I think it's just not her time to be great yet, because as I said in my Topaz video yesterday, I do think that Topaz is a character that's going to have a lot of future potential, but because we don't have as many super strong follow-up attack characters in the game right now, we're not really able to fully see her potential. And then in terms of her being a main DPS, she's just not on the level of some of these other DPS characters that have come out even before her. So she is kind of just stuck in B tier right now. Again, I think one of the better characters in this tier as well, but because she doesn't have all the pieces yet to make her amazing, she is going to be down here. Alright, so now we're going to get into the A tiers, and starting off here with a little bit of a controversial one, it's going to be Jing Yuan. Now I know everyone calls him mid, mid Yuan, all that kind of stuff, but he is actually still a solid character. He can do a lot of good damage, and his Lightning Lord is definitely a very cool mechanic, but he does still have his problems. Now some of these problems have been solved with introductions to characters, and he's been improved with certain characters being in the game. Like Topaz for increasing follow-up attack damage from his Lightning Lord, and then Xuan being able to, get rid of, or at least resist the crowd control debuffs that would stop the Lightning Lord from attacking. So that's going to be really good for Jing Yuan as well. But in terms of damage, he is able to output some decent, some pretty solid damage, compared to some of the other characters we've talked about so far. And even though he has his problems, I do still think he's good. Now, because there are some characters below him that do have, future potential, and I do expect them to be able to, go up above him as time goes on, and when those characters get more pieces to, complete them and make them a lot better. But for right now, I do think Jing Yuan is still solid. I do think he's still an A tier character. There are just characters I would run over Jing Yuan in terms of that damage roll, but pretty much all of them are above him on the tier list. So yeah, I kind of struggled between putting him in A or B, but I'm gonna put him at the very bottom of A, even though this isn't ordered at all. Then next up we have Qingque, or Qingque, and she is very interesting character in terms of how people have thought of her. Because at the beginning of the game, people were like, oh, she's all right and whatnot. But as the game has gone on, as things have progressed in the end game more so to fighting multiple enemies, she can really shine in those kinds of fights. And she's really good in that aspect just because she you know, sure, her damage is, you know, luck based. If you don't get lucky and get her, you know, enhanced basic attack, then you're not really gonna do much damage. But if you get her in the proper situations and you have enough skill points to be able to use her skill, you know, at a max of 4 times, then you'll be able to do a lot of damage. And I've seen some, you know, I've seen some videos about Qingque because I don't have her built myself. But yeah, she can do a lot of damage when you have her built right, and if you get that good luck and have her supported properly. So, you know, while it is, you know, a bit inconsistent, she can still do a lot of damage and be very strong, since she does hit adjacent enemies as well with her enhanced basic attack. So yeah, definitely very solid character there as well. Then we have Pela. I am a big supporter of this character. Honestly, I think Bailu and Pela are the 2 characters I'm like the biggest supporters of. And Pela is just absolutely amazing. I saw her kit at first, you know, and I was like, you know, that could be cool. I wonder, you know, where that'll go. And the more I use her, the more I think she's just amazing. I do think she does sit in A tier right now, but, you know, depending on where the game's going to go from here, I wouldn't be surprised if she went up to S tier. I don't think she's quite there yet, because while her debuffing is great, she does still only, you know, debuff defense, which it's good that she has an AoE defense shred, which is going to be very strong for a long time. But, you know, another character in S tier, which I'm sure you know who it is by now, if I'm talking about debuffs, can debuff multiple stats, which, you know, I feel that kind of is more beneficial than just debuffing defense, but Pela's defense debuffs are no joke. Like, they do a lot, and they're able to make you do a lot of damage as well. So yeah, I think Pela is definitely on the rise, and she could be, you know, just very good in the future. Then next up, we have Kafka, and I think Kafka is, you know, as I said previously on the channel, very kind of similar release situation as Topaz, where, you know, they came out, you know, they're locked into a kind of locked into a playstyle. Kafka not as much here, but the more characters that come out for DOT, the better she's going to become, because she is able to detonate all DOTs on an enemy. So Kafka does you know, have that in, she has that in store for her. And not only that, she did get a buff in the form of Guinaifen, being able to have a constant, you know, burn applier, as well as, you know, the fire kiss increasing damage. And, you know, like I said for Guinaifen, any buffs to DOT, which we, you know, the streets have been saying there is going to be one coming for 1.5. So that buff will probably make Kafka even better as well. But overall, she is able to do some very strong damage with her DOT, as well as whatever other DOTs you're running, because she is able to detonate them and just do a lot of damage that way. Plus, her follow-up attack gives her some synergy with Topaz as well. So just as a damage dealer, she could do some good damage. And, you know, that's just going to put her in A tier. Then next up, we have Gepard, who is the best shielder in the game. His shields are kind of ridiculous when you have them built right. And, you know, whenever I've seen people use Gepard, and the couple of times I've used other people's Gepards, those shields don't break. Like, sure, I won't, because like I have to use other people's. I've only tested it in, like, you know, Calyxes and like weekly bosses and stuff like that. But like, those shields barely break, and that's even like, you know, E0 Gepard, and that's just kind of ridiculous. So being able to do that, you pretty much like don't need a healer if you're able to regenerate his energy fast enough to be able to keep his shields up on a consistent basis, which is absolutely insane. And that definitely makes him, you know, in A tier for sure. He doesn't quite hit S tier, because I think the sustained characters in S tier just do a little bit more than that, which is crazy to think about, but, you know, we'll get to that. Then we have Tingyun, and Tingyun is, I would say, the second best buffer in the game right now. She is able to support one ally at a time, which, you know, on one hand you might be like, oh, you know, it's not that great, but considering that most teams are going to have one main DPS, Tingyun is amazing, because you can focus all your buffs on that DPS and make sure that they're getting their attack boosts. She can give them back energy with her ult, increase the damage of their moves for 2 turns on her ult. So Tingyun is just really strong for DPSs, and I do think that in some situations she ends up being a lot more like universally applicable, whereas other buffers might be better in certain situations. I do think Tingyun is the best like universal one, whereas other, you know, buffers might be better in some situations, it might be worse in some situations. And then lastly, for A tier, I would say at the top of A tier, we have Seele. Now, you know, I've been using Seele since 1.0, because I did pull her on her initial banner, and, you know, back then, she was, like, best in the game for damage. Now it's not as, you know, cut and dry, and I do think there are, you know, damage dealers that are better than her, which they are all in S tier. But that doesn't mean Seele is bad by any means. I know some people have been saying like, oh yeah, she fell off and whatnot. But that's just kind of just the way the game's gonna work. You know, more damage dealers are gonna come out. They're gonna be better. And with Seele focusing on single target damage, that does kind of hinder her a bit. When pretty much all the DPSs above her are doing, you know, adjacent damage at the very least. But Seele can still do some very strong damage, and you know, using her, I was able to, you know, 10-star MOC. Using a combination of her and another DPS up there, and then Kafka as my damage dealers. But yeah, overall, Seele, pretty easy to use. She is a bit skill point hungry, but that's not really like a reason to knock her down, but she just doesn't measure up to the ones above her. So now we're going to go into the S tier, which is the highest tier I have on here. So these are, I would say, the best 7 characters in the game. Not in any particular order, but they are kind of, you know, split into categories here. So starting out with the DPSs, I have the, you know, who I think are the 3 best DPS characters in the game right now. Number 3 being Blade. Now, Blade is very strong, especially, you know, with him taking his own HP to be able to increase his attack. And also just him being very sustainable and self-sustainable with his HP, because he does have ways to heal himself as well to keep himself in the battle, is very strong. So that paired with a healer, pretty much any healer honestly, just keeps Blade going, and he's able to just do a lot of damage there. So yeah, he's very good numbers as well, and that definitely, I think, puts him up above with his sustainability. And then also he doesn't really use that many skill points too, which is very helpful for his kit. Then in terms of DPSs, number 2, Imbibitor Lunae. I do think him and then, you know, our number 1 Jingliu are very close, but Imbibitor Lunae, even though he does ridiculous damage and he has the highest damage numbers in the game, he ends up being a bit inconsistent with his skill points, so you're not always able to hit those amazing numbers. He does have, you know, ways in his kit that'll offset that a little bit, but it still isn't fully consistent. But, you know, with Hanya coming out very soon, she is going to be able to, you know, restore like a set number of skill points through her talent. So we'll see if that will be able to make him more consistent or just make him consistent in general, because I think a consistent Imbibitor Lunae is going to end up possibly making Jingliu the second best and putting him at number 1. But we'll have to see when, you know, when that happens. But right now, Imbibitor Lunae is still very solid, but, you know, he can be a little inconsistent. And then for our best DPS, we have Jingliu, who can do, you know, maybe like slightly less damage than Imbibitor Lunae, but you know, the trade-off for that is having a lot more consistency, where you're able to get into your special state with her very easily, and then it does not only does it do a ton of damage, but also she doesn't take any skill points during her state. So you can, you know, end up running supports that are more skill point intensive, you know, supports like Bronya, and that'll be really helpful for Jingliu there. And just being able to, you know, have that consistent damage in the state is also very helpful as well. So I think Jingliu is definitely the best DPS in the game there. Then we have the 2 best, I would say, like support / debuffer characters. We have Bronya for support, because Bronya, you know, being the best standard banner character since the game came out, she does really good in supporting characters, increasing their damage on her skill, as well as, you know, advancing their action completely, as well as increasing the entire team's attack and crit damage on her ultimate. Bronya is able to just provide a lot of support, which is really awesome, and ends up doing a lot of good for a lot of characters. And, you know, I've been able to, you know, feel the difference between, you know, using Bronya and not using Bronya. It's pretty much night and day. Now, if you're using a DPS that's more skill point intensive, like Imbibitor Lunae, and Bronya might not be the best choice for you, but for the character she does mesh very well with, she's outstanding. So that definitely puts her at S and makes her the best. Then for Silverwolf, I do think she is the best debuffer, although Pela, with the way Pela has been, you know, becoming more and more, you know, variable for me, Pela's not too far behind. But for Silverwolf, she has multiple debuffs she can give, which is really helpful. Plus, she can change the enemy's weakness types to, you know, one of the types that's on your team, which is really strong, because it does make team building for endgame content a bit easier, because you can focus on that if you do have a Silverwolf. And it's not really as much of a concern like if you don't have one particular element, because you can just add the weakness of an element that your account has a lot stronger. So yeah, Silverwolf, you know, pairing the debuffs and also just being the only character that can, and I think ever will, be able to adjust like weakness types on enemies, that makes her really valuable and a really strong character as well. Then for our last sort of group here, we have the two best sustainers in the game. Luocha being the best healer in the game. He is really good at his healing with the utility of having a cleanse on his heal, but also with his passive healing, which comes in the forms of his field, which will heal whenever you deal an attack, and it heals the whole team, which is very nice. As well as him being able to use his skill without using a skill point automatically once every 2 turns. So Luocha being able to keep his allies alive ends up being really helpful, and he does mesh very well with characters that reduce HP of themselves, like Blade, or of their teammates, like Jingliu does. Then lastly, we have Xuan. I do think Xuan is by far the best preservation character, and while she doesn't use shields like a lot of the other preservation characters do, her Matrix of Prescience is kind of ridiculous, because it doesn't only mitigate damage that you take and push damage from your allies to Xuan up to a certain amount, but also it does give a not 10%, well, depending on your trace, but it gives a certain amount of crit rate increase, and that ends up being really strong to make her a buffer as well as a defensive support. So I do think that puts her up above all the other preservations, because she does have that extra utility as well. So yeah, that is my tier list for version 1.4. Let me know what you all think in the comments down below. I'd love to see your thoughts on it. But with that, everyone, I'm going to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed and you haven't already, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell. But with that, I will see you all next time.